When I started dating at 70, my family laughed at me. Until they found out who I was dating. If anyone has ever told you that you're too old to feel butterflies again, stay with me. If someone in your own family has made you feel small for wanting a little happiness, stay with me too. Because what I'm about to tell you happened to me, and it changed the way I look at my own children forever. My name is Margaret Collins. I'm 70 years old. My children laughed in my face when I told them I was dating again. They stopped laughing the moment they found out exactly who I was dating. 11 years of silence. I've been a widow for 11 years. My husband Frank died the way nobody expects, fixing the gutter on a Saturday morning, grumbling about the Cardinals losing again, gone 3 weeks later from a heart attack that gave no warning at all. 11 years is a long time to sleep on one side of a bed. It's a long time to cook dinner for one person and eat it in front of the television just so the silence in the kitchen doesn't swallow you whole. My daughter Denise calls every Sunday, 12 minutes, usually about the grandkids. My son Peter visits on holidays, if his in-laws don't get to him first. I made my peace with a quiet life, church, my garden, Tuesday lunch with my friend Carol, and every other Thursday, the Rosewood Public Library Book Club. I had no idea that book club was about to blow my quiet little life wide open. You don't trust him, I said. Not a question. I don't know him, she said. Which wasn't really an answer. Then, in early December, I let myself into Denise's house to drop off some of Frank's old tools Rich had been asking about. Nobody answered when I called out, but I could hear voices from the kitchen. Low. Urgent. The kind of voices people use when they think no one else is listening. If she marries him, Denise, that's it. The whole inheritance gone. I froze in the hallway, hands still on the doorknob. That was Peter. We don't even know if he has money, or if he's after hers, Denise said. Either way, we need to protect her. And us. I already talked to a lawyer, Peter said, and my stomach dropped straight through the floor. There are ways to look into this. Background checks. If he's after her assets, we need proof before this goes any further. You hired a lawyer? Consulted. Free first meeting. Somebody has to think clearly, because Mom sure isn't. I stood in that hallway and felt something inside me crack quietly down the middle, like ice giving way under weight it was never built to hold. My own children, sitting in that kitchen, talking about me like a liability to be managed instead of their mother who simply wanted to be happy. Again after 11 years alone. I set the toolbox by the door and left without a word. Not yet. I wasn't ready. Christmas Eve. I invited Walter to Christmas dinner anyway. I told my children plainly, if they wanted to see me, he'd be at the table too. They came, grudgingly. Denise brought a casserole and a face like she'd swallowed a lemon. Peter arrived 30 minutes late with a traffic excuse. Nobody believed. Rich made a beeline for the eggnog. Walter arrived exactly on time, wine in hand, with a small gift for each grandchild, things he'd noticed them mention months earlier and quietly remembered. An astronomy book for Tyler, who dreamed of studying physics. A notebook and pen set for Emma, who wanted to write. Even Denise's frost cracked a little, watching her kids light up. Then, mid-dinner, the doorbell rang. It was our neighbor, Mrs. Delgado, breathless and pale. Her husband had fallen on the icy driveway. The ambulance was 15 minutes out. Did we know if Dr. Hayes was here? Dr. Hayes. Walter stood before she'd even finished the sentence. Show me where he is. The whole table followed him out into the cold. Mr. Delgado lay on the ice, clutching his arm, pale with pain. Walter knelt beside him instantly, checking his pulse, asking calm, precise questions, gently examining the arm, speaking in a voice so steady it calmed the rest of us just listening to it. He took off his own coat and laid it over the old man's shoulders. Fracture, not a break, I think. Just keep him warm and still. When the paramedics arrived, they greeted him like an old friend. Dr. Hayes. Good to see you out here, as always. Still sharper than half the residents I train. Peter, standing beside me on that freezing driveway, went completely quiet. Dr. Hayes, he repeated, staring at Walter like he was seeing him for the first time in his life. The truth. Once her husband was safely loaded into the ambulance, Mrs. Delgado turned to my stunned family, eyes shining with gratitude. You don't know who this man is? She looked genuinely baffled. This is Dr. Walter Hayes. 40 years as a pediatric surgeon at St. Andrews. He's the reason half the children in this town are still alive. He founded the children's wing at that hospital, paid for most of it himself, and he still volunteers there twice a month. My own grandson is alive today because of a surgery this man performed 15 years ago. I watched the color drain from my son's face. I watched my daughter's hand rise slowly to cover her mouth. Back inside, Rich pulled out his phone, scrolled, and went pale. There's a whole page here. Dr. Walter Hayes founded the pediatric surgical wing at St. Andrews. Donated over $3 million of his own money. Over 4,000 surgeries. There's a section on the hospital's website called Founders and Honors. Silence, except for the fireplace crackling. $3 million, Peter said, almost to himself. And I watched the exact moment it landed on him, hard, humiliating. This man they'd whispered about as a gold digger, the one they'd consulted a lawyer over, had personally given away more money to sick children than our entire family had ever possessed, combined. Why didn't you ever say anything? Denise whispered. Walter set down his fork gently. Because it never mattered to the conversation we were having. I wasn't dating your mother to impress anybody. I was dating her because she makes me laugh, and because she remembers things about people that most folks forget, and because sitting across from her at dinner is the best part of my week. None of that has anything to do with money. Nobody at that table had a response. I don't think anyone in the history of our family had ever been that speechless. What I told them. Later that night, after Walter had gone home and the grandchildren were parked in front of a holiday movie, I sat Peter and Denise down in the living room, the way I used to when they were children who'd done something that required a serious talk. I heard you, Peter, I said, before either of them could speak. In Denise's kitchen. Lawyers. Background checks. Protecting your inheritance. Peter's face went white. Denise looked down at her lap. I'm not angry that you were worried about me, I said. I understand. Worry. But you weren't protecting me, you were protecting yourselves. And you dressed it up as concern because that felt better than the truth. Mom, that's not. Let me finish. She quieted. In 11 years, not one of you asked if I was lonely. If I missed having someone to talk to at the end of the day. Someone to hold my hand at a funeral. But the moment I found that for myself, the very first thing either of you thought about was money. Not my happiness. Money. The television murmured faintly from the other room. I'm not asking for an apology tonight. I don't want one you haven't earned, one you're only offering because you got caught being wrong about a man's bank account. I want you to sit with why your first instinct, when your mother found happiness, was suspicion instead of joy. Peter was quiet a long moment. I went to that lawyer because I was scared, Mom. Not of losing money. Of losing you, to someone who might hurt you. I didn't know how else to protect you, so I focused on the only thing I could actually investigate. Maybe. But you went behind my back instead of sitting across from me and asking honestly what I saw in him. That's what hurt, Peter. Not the suspicion. The silence. Denise, tears in her eyes now. We really are sorry, Mom. Not because of who he turned out to be. We should have trusted your judgment either way. I think we just weren't ready to think of you as someone who still needed romance. We wanted you to just be our mother. Not a woman with a whole life of her own. That was the truest thing either of my children had said to me in months. What came after? Trust, once cracked, takes time to set again, like a bone that needs to heal slow if you don't want it snapping right back. But it did heal. Peter started calling more, and meaning it. Denise started inviting Walter over without being asked, tentative at first, then with real warmth. Rich began asking Walter for advice about his own aging parents, the smug jokes about walkers replaced by something that looked a lot like respect. Tyler read that astronomy book twice through and started spending hours on the back porch grilling Walter about medicine, the human body. What it takes to become a surgeon. Emma showed me a poem she'd written in that notebook, about her grandmother finding love again after loss, about learning that getting older doesn't mean giving up on wanting things. I cried reading it. The good kind of crying. Walter proposed the following spring, at the same bench by the pond where we'd taken all our early walks. No production, no hidden photographers. Just his hand over mine, and, Margaret, I spent 40 years fixing children's hearts for a living. Somehow, at 73. You're the one who finally fixed mine. Would you do me the honor of marrying me? I said yes before he'd even finished opening the ring box. We married in the garden behind my house, the same garden Walter used to help me weed on quiet Sunday afternoons. Denise cried through the entire ceremony. Peter insisted on walking me down the aisle, and his voice cracked, telling everyone how proud he was of his mother for teaching him, later in life than he'd like to admit, what real love and real courage actually look like. Mrs. Delgado was there. So were a handful of Walter's former patients, grown adults now, with children of their own, who still showed up to celebrate his happiness the way you'd show up for family. What I want you to take from this. I think about that Thanksgiving table sometimes, Rich's joke about the walker, Peter's accusation, the way I sat there feeling smaller than I had in years. And then I think about our wedding day, my son's voice cracking with pride, my daughter's tears of genuine joy, my grandchildren dancing with a man they now call Grandpa Walter without a hint of hesitation. Love doesn't come with an expiration date, no matter what age is printed on your driver's license. And sometimes the people who claim to be protecting you are really just protecting themselves from having to see you as a whole, complicated, still changing person, instead of the simple, static role they assigned you decades ago. My children learned that the hard way. Through their own shame. Through their own quiet reckoning with everything they'd assumed about a good man, and worse, about their own mother. I'm 72 now. I have a husband who still opens the car door for me, who still remembers how I take my coffee, who treats every person he meets with the same quiet decency, whether she's a grieving widow at a library book club, or a frightened old man lying on an icy driveway on Christmas Eve. I have 2 children who finally see me clearly. And grandchildren who've learned, hopefully far earlier than I ever did, that it is never too late to want more out of life, and that the people who truly love you will eventually learn to celebrate that, even if it takes them a while to get there. If this story touched you, don't scroll past without hitting like and subscribe for more. Do you believe it's ever too late to find love again? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one.